Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of 6 for 6. This is season 5, episode 8. Yes, we have been away for quite some time, but now we're back to a regular cadence. Everything else is going relatively smooth, but now we're on to the final four of the craziness of March Madness, ladies and gentlemen. It's been one of those years where you have parts of the bracket where it makes sense and other parts just didn't make any sense. UConn surviving up, launching that buzzer beater to knock off Duke in the men's bracket. But on the women's side, ladies and gentlemen, we got all number one seeds to the Final Four. That's like an impressive run. But these women in the Final Four for women's college basketball are the best that we've seen in quite some time. Like, this is the most competitive Final Four that we've seen in quite some time. But in the men's side of things, Arizona and Michigan looking relatively good. But then you have Illinois and UConn looking to make a president case for being a 2 and a 3 seed. So we got a lot of things to talk about. 4 games to really get through today and help you kind of get started. The women's games start this Friday, April 3rd, and then the men's kind of start on the Saturday, April 4th. So that's what we got going on, and it also leads up into Easter. So it's a very jam-packed weekend, if you want to say. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's start getting down to business. And the 4th slot, ladies and gentlemen, we got Texas as a 1 seed versus UCLA as a 1 seed. Women's college basketball Final Four, Friday, April 3rd, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ESPN, ladies and gentlemen. What a match we got here. Texas knocking off Michigan in a very dominant fashion, 77-41. But if you look at their last 5 games within the month of March Madness, they have just been an elite team, playing good, solid, fundamental basketball and really dominating their margin very convincingly. After they beat Michigan, they played they played Kentucky and won 76-54. Then they bullied Oregon to 100-58, and then they played Montana State, I want to say, or Missouri State, and they won 87-45. So that's what they got. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, they also beat South Carolina too, and that was back on March 8th, and that score was 78-61. So that Texas is in a really good spot, really good momentum, knocking off good, solid basketball teams. However, when you look at UCLA, they're doing the same thing, similar margins. They beat the Lady Blue Devils in Duke 70-56, beat up on Minnesota 80-56, knocked off Oklahoma State 87-66, and then they beat a small school CBU 96-43, and they also knocked off Iowa convincingly 96-45. So this is going to be an elite basketball game. I mean, the stat lines look relatively similar. Field goal percentage for both schools around like the 50s. Texas at 50, UCLA is at 51. Points average per game is around like 85 for both schools. And then you have points against relatively, 56-57 for both schools. Like, it's all the way across the board, evenly matchup. But then you get to the steals. Texas has more steals by 3, almost 12 steals a game compared to UCLA's 8.5. But blocks are about the same. But however, UCLA has a little bit more better ball movement, has 22 assists compared to Texas 18 assists in this game. I like this matchup in UCLA just based on how they've been playing. And even on top of this, they only have lost 1 game all season. Texas only lost 3. Either way, this is still a great matchup on Friday night, ladies and gentlemen. So make sure you tune in to catch number 1 Texas versus number 1 UCLA. Friday, April 3rd, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ESPN. Now let's move into the 3rd slot. The 3rd slot, we're looking at the men's side of the bracket now, ladies and gentlemen, talking about Michigan, the Maize and Blue, taking on Arizona. Both 1 seeds at 8:49 p.m. Eastern Time, 5:49 p.m. Pacific Time on TBS, True TV, and HBO Max. What a game that we got going on. Michigan knocked off Tennessee in a good fashion, 95-62. Knocked off Alabama 90-77. Then they played, I think, St. Louis, won 95-72, and then knocked off Howard 101-80. What a great matchup, if you say. Arizona has a great resume too, beating Purdue, which is going to give them a leg up against Michigan in this one. having 97-64, beating up on Arkansas 109-88, beating up on Utah State 78-66, and then they played a small score of 92-58. But if you look at that, it's going to be the Purdue game that's really going to help Arizona dominate this fashion, and look at that film and see how Purdue played and see if they can mimic that against Michigan and walk out with a victory in this one. But I mean, points a game, again, on average, ladies and gentlemen, you're talking about Michigan about almost 88 points a game compared to Arizona's 87. Points against relatively around the same, both around like 69. Field goal percentage 51 for Michigan and 50% for Arizona. Rebounds 40-42. Assists around like 18 compared to Arizona's 17. And the blocks go to Michigan with 6 compared to Arizona's 4. And then you got your steal margin, ladies and gentlemen, with about 5.5 to Arizona's 7. I like Arizona in this one. It's going to be one of those good fashion games. And if they can mimic how they shut down Purdue, I don't think they're going to have too much of a problem taking on Michigan. Now, let's get into the second slot, ladies and gentlemen. Number 3, Illinois versus number 2, UConn, ladies and gentlemen. What a matchup in the men's Final Four on Saturday at 6:09 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:09 p.m. Pacific Time on TBS, True TV, and HBO Max. Records for both schools, ladies and gentlemen, is 28-8 for Illinois. UConn is 33-5. I mean, Illinois has been a better team all year round, putting up points. I mean, looking at their campaign, they knocked off Penn 105-77, beat up on VCU 76-55, knocked off Houston to 56-55, and had a solid win over Iowa 71-59. However, UConn had a thriller buzzer beater against Duke 73-72, knocked off Michigan State 67-63, beat UCLA 73-57, and then I think beat Fairmount to 82-71. So we got a really good matchup across the board for UConn and across this margin that we got going on. Field goal percentage for UConn is about 48. Illinois about 46. Points average per game, Illinois averages about 84 compared to UConn 77. And points against about 69 for Illinois, about 65 for UConn. Assists, better ball movement for UConn, so that's going to give them more chance for more open shots. So UConn's assists right now is about 18 assists per game compared to Illinois, 14.5 assists per game. Blocks, about the same, about 5 blocks for both schools. And then steals, Illinois doesn't really steal the ball too much. So you got almost 4 steals per game compared to UConn's almost 7. So that's where it's going to come play. I think UConn's the better squad here. They're really going to try to make a push towards the Final Four and get back to that national title level. So give me UConn in this matchup. And then the game of the week, ladies and gentlemen, Friday, South Carolina, Don Staley going up against UConn, undefeated right now. A tall task for the Lady South Carolina squad against the Lady Huskies. What a game this is going to be. This is probably going to be an ESPN classic how this goes down, because UConn is 38-0, looking to claim that 39-0 over South Carolina, but I don't think South Carolina is going to let that happen. I think South Carolina is the better squad, even though UConn has been dominating. But this is what true champion teams look like, ladies and gentlemen. This should have been the finals, but we get a little teaser of what that's going to be like. If South Carolina pulls it out, then you're going to have an interesting matchup with UCLA and South Carolina, or UCLA or Texas versus South Carolina. Either way, you got really good matchups in the women's bracket this week, going into this weekend, going into the final as well. But South Carolina is being disrespected with a 35% chance to win compared to UConn's about 65% chance to win in this matchup. What a time to be alive for this, ladies and gentlemen. But if you look at South Carolina's matchup, ladies and gentlemen, they knocked off TCU 78-52, knocked off Oklahoma 94-68, knocked off USC 101-61, and then beat a small school of 103-56 33-34. And then they have that loss to Texas. But however, I think they're going to rebound. They got the loss at the right time. So this is a prime spot. UConn has a great resume as well, knocking off Notre Dame 70-52, knocking off North Carolina 63-42, knocked off Syracuse 98-45, knocked off UTSA 90-52, and then beating Villanova at the beginning of March around 90-51. So overall, matchup looks good. But then you look at the stat line. You have South Carolina about 87. UConn's about 88 points per game. As points against, UConn has that solid defense, about 50 points given up per game, compared to South Carolina's 58 points given up. But from the field goal, ladies and gentlemen, great from both schools. 51% for South Carolina and 52 for UConn. Rebounds go to South Carolina with 42.5 compared to UConn's 38 rebounds, but better ball movement for UConn, ladies and gentlemen, with 23 assists compared to South Carolina's 18. Blocks about the same, but South Carolina gets about 6 blocks a game compared to UConn's 5. But the steals come from UConn. They're a scrappy bunch with about 15 steals, almost 16 steals per game compared to South Carolina's 10. So that's what we got. I'm going to go with South Carolina in this one. This is a tall task order based on how good this UConn's women's team is right now, ladies and gentlemen. I just like how they carry themselves in this matchup, on how impactful this is going to be, because they are trying to go back to win their title 100% in this one. But we'll see what this looks like in the coming days and leading up to this matchup. I'm just trying to document the selections that I have. So once those games are up, we have everything. So let's get a quick recap before we get you on out of here to enjoy the games that are leading up this week. In the 4th slot, ladies and gentlemen, we got Texas as a number 1 seed versus UCLA as a 1 seed. Friday, women's college basketball, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ESPN, and I have UCLA winning this. And our 3 slot, we have Michigan versus Arizona Saturday at 8:49 p.m. Eastern Time, 5:49 p.m. Pacific Time on TBS, True TV, and HBO Max, and I have Arizona winning this matchup. And the 2nd slot, ladies and gentlemen, we have Illinois as a 3 seed versus UConn as a 2 seed. Saturday, 6:09 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:09 p.m. Pacific Time on TBS, True TV, and on HBO Max. And I have UConn winning this matchup. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, the game of the week, South Carolina as a 1 seed versus UConn as a 1 seed. Women's college basketball, Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time on ESPN. And I have South Carolina winning this matchup. And like I said, last week's episode, ladies and gentlemen, we were 2-4, and that changes our overall record to 23-19. So hopefully we can get through that and have another, I would say not a 6 for 6, but a 4-0 pick in this scenario. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of 6 for 6, and we'll catch you next time. So long for now. Bye-bye.